Although Kurosawa was very influenced by Japanese history and kabuki theater, many of his contemporaries accused him of being too Western. Japanese critics go on and on about how Western I am, mainly just because I am interested in people. They love the artless simplicity and a terribly Japanese quality. Well, that is certainly not my way of working, said Kurosawa. Perhaps this is why he is more highly regarded in Western nations than in Japan, where he has not received as much respect.
あれ態度がね、でとにかく映画はすごく尊敬してますからね、映画の仕事っていうのは、今でもそうですよ。日本と外国行けばね、VIP だけどこっち行くとこっち来たって言うんだけどそんなことはありませんけど、まあ確かに僕もそう思います。正直に言って。
It caused him a lot of grief in Japan because of the fact that he was Western in his orientation and storytelling. He was not extremely well regarded in Japan, especially in the beginning. And it was really once his films were taken out of the country and put into international film festivals and that sort of thing that they begin to get recognition, that I think the Japanese begin to
Kurosawa
soften.
seems to realize this as well, and he says, quote, "The Japanese are always terribly critical of Japanese films, so it is not too surprising that a foreigner should be responsible for sending Rashomon to the Venice Film Festival. It was the same way with Japanese woodcuts. Foreigners first appreciated them. We always think too little of our own things. Actually, Rashomon wasn't all that good. When I say this, people always say to me, 'You Japanese always think too little of your own things. Why don't you stand up for the film?'" Rashomon was one of Kurosawa's most important films. When it took first place at the 1951 Venice Film Festival, many in the West experienced Japanese cinema for the first time. Rashomon's narrative structure demonstrates the impossibility of obtaining the truth from conflicting eyewitness accounts. The terms the Rashomon effect and Rashomonian editing take their names from this film. Rashomon was also remade as a Western, titled The Outrage, starring Paul Newman and William Shatner. 20 years later, after the failure of his film Dodes Karen, compounded by his lack of support in Japan and his failing health, Kurosawa attempted suicide in 1971. However, he would find support a few years later in two young directors from America.
I first met Akira Kurosawa in Tokyo at a time in his own career after a period of depression or inactivity that began with the incidents concerning Tora Tora Tora. He had been the director of the Japanese language sequences, and due to difficulties or disagreements, he left that film. Was replaced, and ultimately, I understand, was in a period of sadness and depression, was unable to put together a personal film and was short on money. This time coincided with my own kind of emergence with films like The Godfather, and at a time when I was successful, and then my colleague George Lucas was very successful in the international cinema. The notion was put forth that if George Lucas, after his great success in Star Wars, and myself would present his film, that we could go to a film company, and with that package of George Lucas and Francis Coppola presenting a new film of Akira Kurosawa, that might swing getting the finance. And of course we were anxious to help, and the film was Kagemusha. And no doubt, now that as I think, Fox was the company that had done Star Wars. And so it probably was George who was the instrumental one in just saying, hey, do the Kurosawa film, because at that point Star Wars had saved and had greatly, embellished Fox's prestige. And I think anything George would have said to them, they would have done.
When 20th Century Fox came into the production, he had already prepared it. He was all ready to go. And Toho was short $1.5 million or something like that. They weren't going to go unless they could come up with this money. They couldn't sell the foreign rights because nobody bought Japanese films. And so it was really a way of just saying, look, let's get this film made, give Toho the money they need to finish it. And 20th Century Fox obviously did it. They didn't expect to make any money out of it. They did it as a favor to me. And basically, when it happened between Alan Ladd Jr. and myself. I simply said, I need a favor. Sort of The Godfather. Do this for me. I need it. And he said, okay, I'll do it.
The film, Kagemusha, would win first place at the 1980 Cannes Film Festival. George Lucas drew inspiration from Kurosawa when he was writing the first Star Wars film, and thus was glad to rescue one of his icons.
About Hidden Fortresses, it did influence me in doing Star Wars, because as I was beginning to write the screenplay and put it together, I remembered Hidden Fortress, and I remembered the one thing that really struck me about Hidden Fortress, and I was really intrigued by, was the fact that the story was told from the two lowest characters. I decided that that would be a nice way to tell the Star Wars story, which is take the two lowliest characters, as Kurosawa did, and tell the story from their point of view, which in the Star Wars case is the two droids. And that was the strongest influence, actually.
Coppola also attributed some of his filmmaking style, as well as others' filmmaking style, to Kurosawa.
The kind of violence was depicted in almost a poetic, surprising way that seemed to stem from those moments which startled you with violence, and yet it went beyond just being gruesome, but being stunning and dramatic and embody the moment that was supposed to be expressed. And that became a style really, I would say, originating from Kurosawa through certainly Peckinpah, but Bonnie and Clyde, my own film, The Godfather. I think you could trace a line backwards from The Godfather to Bonnie and Clyde to Kurosawa.
Kurosawa's career is linked to Western culture, even if many of his finest films were samurai jidaigeki, or period pieces. Kurosawa's interest in Western literature led him to adapt 2 Shakespeare plays, an American novel, and 2 Russian novels. However, the West reciprocated this fascination by adapting his films into classics of their own genre and rescuing his career. At the 1990 Academy Awards, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, both of whom helped to produce his film Dreams, presented Kurosawa with the Lifetime Achievement Award.
このような大変立派な賞をいただいて誠に光栄に思います。
I am very deeply honored to receive such a wonderful prize.
しかし果たして私がそれに値するかどうか少し心配です。
But I have to ask whether I really deserve it. I'm a little worried.
なぜなら私はまだ映画がよく分かっていない。
Because I don't feel that I understand cinema yet.
いや、しかし私はこれからもこの映画という素晴らしいものをつかむために全力を尽くすつもりです。それがこの賞に応える一番いい方法だと思うからです。
So what I promise you is that from now on, I will work as hard as I can at making movies, and maybe by following this path, I will achieve an understanding of the true essence of cinema and earn this award.
George, Steven.